Well, let's move on to the housing crisis here in the UK because it's showing no signs of stopping. And this time there are signs of homelessness that can be spotted in a steep rise in temporary accommodations across the nation. Now, the department, for Levelling Up Housing and Communities has issued figures pertaining to the status of homelessness and temporary accommodations in the country. Now, the data, it covers developments in housing and found that over 79,000 households were owed help from local authorities to address homelessness. Now, currently, homelessness in England is at the highest since 2018. Over 50% of these households already lost a roof over their head. Now, London takes the lion's share of 18% of households that are affected by this. The number includes families as well as single people. Now, these figures point to the increasing threat of homelessness across Britain. Meanwhile, over 100,000 households were housed in temporary accommodation, proved to address homelessness. The numbers rose by 10% in just over 1 year, and are the highest since records began in 1998. A key driver of the increase was the termination of short-hold tenancies. This is a type of fixed-term contract wherein the landlord can evict the tenant without reason and with a 2-month notice. Now, such events, they are commonly called as no-fault evictions. Another factor leading to stress on the British housing is the freezing of local housing allowances. Now, this is a housing benefit which people can claim if they're renting privately. The government has frozen these allowances at pre-pandemic levels, adding pressure on families. Now, housing charities are calling upon the government to build more affordable social housing to ease the pressure on the private sector. The government is also being pushed to pass its planned renters reform bill. Now, the bill seeks to abolish no-fault evictions in law at the earliest. Well, for more details on this topic, our London correspondent Alex Isaac is standing by for us. This is a really difficult situation here in the country because, of course, we've got the cost of living crisis. We know that the cost of living is getting unaffordable for a lot of people, and even people with jobs. It's now quite extortionate unless you're on a very high salary. I think most people are feeling the pinch at the moment. What's happening in regards to homelessness? Because we're looking at the figures now and they are going up.
You're absolutely right. Now, the homelessness and housing has been a difficult situation for many years. So this isn't new, but sadly it has gone up quite a lot. And there are seem to be many issues that are involved, rather than just that renters bill that you mentioned they're going through. The fact is that there supposedly isn't enough affordable housing, but every time there's a new housing estate built, people do complain, and the amount of affordable housing gets smaller. Also, there is a real issue within the benefit system here in the UK. We went through a phase of being able to buy your council house, which took off a load of council houses from the market. There are affordable houses that are no longer available. They are now privately owned. And of course, if you did have a council property, you got on the list, you were lucky enough to get a property, therefore you are not means tested again after that initial bedding into that property. So there are many people who have taken advantage of the small amount of social housing in the UK by not having to be means tested, as they have lived there for 10, 20 years, and those houses have not come back into the availability of those that really do need them now. And also, when we're looking at the housing market in general, it's exceptionally high to rent privately, but also buying houses doesn't seem to be on many people's agendas. They can't afford it. The banks don't allow people to get mortgages if they say that they can't afford it, yet rents are so exceptionally high, a mortgage would actually be cheaper. We heard only this week that there was going to be more houses built, but there wasn't really a discussion about where these houses were also going to be built. People need to be in the cities if they are working, and sadly many of them have minimum wage jobs and they can't afford to be even further out because they have to get transportation in. So there is a whole mix of issues with regards to affordable housing and homelessness. people shouldn't have to choose homelessness because they can't live anywhere, and asking the government to put them up in a temporary accommodation like hotels and hostels, well, obviously that's going to be costing the taxpayer even more as well, when most people do want to just have a place where they can rent affordably. There does need to be a talk about not just a renters bill and that section 21 that you mentioned with the no fault evictions, but also maybe putting a cap on the amount of rents and how much they're costing, especially in the City of London, where they have now gone up extortionately. A one-bedroom flat here is around 1,700 British pounds to 2,000 British pounds, and that's a lot of money, and people who are on that minimum wage, they just can't afford it. There is more than just one issue here, and there's more than one solution, but some solution really does need to be taken forward, because people are starving and having to go onto the streets, and it shouldn't be happening in a country like the UK.
Well, you're quite right there. It shouldn't be happening here because it's one of the richest countries in the world. And that's why it is so shocking when we talk about homelessness and we talk about people struggling, especially people who perhaps maybe work in the NHS, they have a full-time job, and we're hearing about people like nurses going to food banks, for example. I read a report this morning, 1 in 4 new UK home buyers under 25, they're relying on the bank of mum and dad now. But then you get this discrepancy between people who maybe come from a wealthier family where their mum and dad can help them get on that property ladder, and those people that simply can't. It's virtually impossible for some people at the moment. Alex, I know that you report a lot on the strikes that are happening here in the country, and it's sort of a problem where it's a vicious cycle of problems here, because we've got the situation where the cost of everything is going up. You mentioned the rents in London. The cost is going up when you go to the supermarket, but wages aren't.
Well, absolutely right. There's discussion about this inflation, and that's why wages haven't risen so much in the past 10 years. But that doesn't really seem to come out too well for the people when they're seeing huge privately owned companies or publicly backed companies getting hundreds of thousands of pounds, and also CEOs taking home ridiculous amounts, really, when it comes down to how the median of the wage and how people can afford to live as well. It doesn't seem that there is going to be much movement. Even when the strikes were happening, as you mentioned there are a lot of NHS workers, railway workers who want their pay increased, and the government has said, well, if we put that up, we're likely to go towards a recession because that affects inflation, and we can't put up wages for everything else we have to pay. It's this constant circle that we keep hearing about, but it comes down to even private companies aren't actually putting up their wages either. So it isn't just like on the government to put up that percentage. Private companies aren't doing it. Public companies aren't doing it. It doesn't seem that we are moving forward. This is a situation where a couple decades ago, I should say, not even a couple of years ago, whole families could live off one person's wage, and we've come forward now where everyone in the household needs to be working, and they still aren't getting to the situation where they can afford their own houses, and not everybody wants to buy a house. Also, of course, it's great if you have the bank of mum and dad to help, but people just want to be able to live where they want to, and if that is their choice to just keep renting, then they shouldn't have to pay extortionate and choose between whether or not they're paying their rent, paying their bills, or able to eat as well. So it's a whole conversation that has to happen, continuing with the government and also private sectors as well.
Alex Isaac, thank you so very much indeed for explaining that all to us. Alex Isaac, our London correspondent here on WION World as One.